Thrive. The third metric to redefining success and creating a life of well-being, wisdom, and wonder. Arianna Huffington. Wisdom. The endless cycle of idea and action, endless invention, endless experiment, brings knowledge of motion, but not of stillness. Knowledge of speech, but not of silence. Knowledge of words, and ignorance of the word. Where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? T.S. Eliot. Life as a Classroom. Growing up in Athens, I was brought up on the classics and the Greek myths. They were taught to me not as ancient history, as my children learned, them in their American classrooms, but as my personal roots and the source of my identity. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, and, for me, the idea of wisdom is forever identified with her. Weaving together strength and vulnerability, creativity and nurturing, passion and discipline, pragmatism and intuition, intellect and imagination, claiming them all, the masculine and the feminine, as part of our essence and expression. Today, we need Athena's wisdom more than ever. She breathes soul and compassion, exactly what has been missing, into the traditionally masculine world of work and success. Her emergence, fully armed and independent, from Zeus's head, and her total ease in the practical world of men, whether on the battlefield or in the affairs of the city, her inventive creativity, her passion for law, justice, and politics, they all serve as a reminder that creation and action are as inherently natural to women as they are to men. Women don't need to leave behind the deeper parts of themselves in order to thrive in a male-dominated world. In fact, women, and men too, need to reclaim these instinctual strengths if they are to tap into their inner wisdom and redefine success. Wisdom is precisely what is missing when, like rats in the famous experiment conducted by B.F. Skinner more than 50 years ago, we press the same levers again and again even though there is no longer any real reward. By bringing deeper awareness into our everyday lives, wisdom frees us from the narrow reality we're trapped in. A reality consumed by the first two metrics of success, money and power, long after they have ceased to fulfill us. Indeed, we continue to pull the levers not only after their diminishing returns have been exhausted, but even after it's clear they're actually causing us harm in terms of our health, our peace of mind, and our relationships. Wisdom is about recognizing what we're really seeking: connection and love. But in order to find them, we need to drop our relentless pursuit of success as society defines it for something more genuine, more meaningful, and more fulfilling. Icarus, the Greek mythological figure who flew too close to the sun until his wax wings melted, is a great distillation of the tragedy of modern man. Ignoring all warnings until it is too late, he plunges headlong to his death in the ocean below. As Christopher Booker, author of The 7 Basic Plots, puts it, puffed up by his power to fly, he falls into the state of hubris, the cosmic pride which is the essence of egocentricity. Hubris defies the supreme law of balance and proportion, which governs everything in the universe and the interrelatedness of all its parts. Icarus defies physical laws, and the wax on his wings burns up as a result, just as we have been defying our true nature and end up burning out. When we re-examine what we really want, we realize that everything that happens in our lives, every misfortune, every slight, every loss, and also every joy, every surprise, every happy accident, is a teacher. And life is a giant classroom. That's the foundation of wisdom that spiritual teachers, poets, and philosophers throughout history have given expression to, from the Bibles. Not a single sparrow can fall to the ground without God knowing it. To Rilke's, perhaps all the dragons of our life are princesses, who are only waiting to see us once beautiful and brave. My favorite expression of wisdom, one that I keep laminated in my wallet, is by Marcus Aurelius. True understanding is to see the events of life in this way. You are here for my benefit, though rumor paints you otherwise. And everything is turned to one's advantage when he greets a situation like this. You are the very thing I was looking for. Truly, whatever arises in life is the right material to bring about your growth and the growth of those around you. This, in a word, is art. And this art called life is a practice suitable to both men and gods. Everything contains some special purpose and a hidden blessing. What then could be strange or arduous when all of life is here to greet you like an old and faithful friend? I had a dream many years ago that sums up this thought in a different way, one that has become a sustaining metaphor for me. I am on a train going home to God. Bear with me. It's a long journey, and everything that happens in my life is scenery along the way. Some of it is beautiful. I want to linger over it a while, perhaps hold on to it or even try to take it with me. Other parts of the journey are spent grinding through a barren, ugly countryside. Either way, the train moves on, and pain comes whenever I cling to the scenery, beautiful or ugly, rather than accept that all the scenery is grist for the mill, containing, as Marcus Aurelius counseled us, some hidden purpose and a hidden blessing. My family, of course, is on board with me. Beyond our families, we choose who is on the train with us, who we share our journey with. The people we invite on the train are those with whom we are prepared to be vulnerable and real, with whom there is no room for masks and games. They strengthen us when we falter and remind us of the journey's purpose when we become distracted by the scenery. And we do the same for them. Never let life's Iagos flatterers, dissemblers, onto your train. We always get warnings from our heart and our intuition when they appear, but we are often too busy to notice. When you realize they've made it on board, make sure you usher them off the train, and as soon as you can, forgive them and forget them. There is nothing more draining than holding grudges. Divorce, especially if you have children, is one of life's hardest classrooms and can be one of the biggest sources of stress in our personal lives. Michael, my ex-husband, and I were married for 11 years and have been divorced for 16. And though we no longer had a marriage to keep us together, we had something even more powerful and permanent: our daughters. And, spurred by our mutual devotion to them, we have made a huge effort to work through all the difficulties and be friends. This has included spending Christmas Day and both of our girls' birthdays together as a family every year. And, little by little, with a lot of hard work, we've grown closer and closer. I remember the first time we went as a family on a summer vacation after our divorce, and how healing it was to be able to let go of our grudges and focus instead on the fact that we have 2 daughters together. A bond that transcends all grievances we'd built up through the years. We spent a lot of time on that vacation, and on many others since, strolling down memory lane with our girls or taking fanciful forays into the future. We spent a lot of time one night debating the pros and cons of evening weddings and the names of yet-to-be-born, and thankfully yet-to-be-conceived grandchildren. Our marriage may have been over, but our relationship wasn't, and isn't. And like any relationship, it requires work and care and attention. The surest sign that my ex and I had reached a better place was a newfound willingness on both our parts to not let our pet peeves get in the way of our having a good time. Even in the happiest of marriages, there are little things that each partner does that inevitably set the other one off. These annoyances are magnified tenfold when you are no longer together as a couple, which is why making an effort to avoid them is one of the secrets of a good divorce. For instance, Michael was a pioneer in insisting on no digital devices on holidays when the family was together, so I have kept to a 100% BlackBerry ban during our times together. For my part, I was always put off by the way he would openly fume if I was even 1 second late for something, even on vacation. I always thought not having to adhere to a strict timetable was one of the defining features of a vacation. But gradually that changed. When I would roll in a few minutes late to dinner, he wouldn't glare. While we did not survive as a couple, at least we've survived in the joint parenting of our daughters, and the children are usually the biggest casualties of a bad divorce. God, Isabella said one day during a recent vacation, it's hard to remember you guys are divorced. For some reason, that made me very, very happy. It felt like I had reached the end of a long and arduous journey, and we were all the better for having made it. For the sake of our inner peace and happiness, as well as for the sake of all the many children whose parents get divorced every year, this is a journey well worth taking. Resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Carrie Fisher. There is nothing that we need more today than having proportion restored to disproportion, and separating our everyday worries and preoccupations from what is truly important. An amazing array of seemingly incompatible people and activities can coexist in our lives with harmony, and a sense of order when we find an unambiguous center in ourselves. I felt that when I first went to India at the age of 17. I had gone to Visva Bharati University, founded in Shantiniketan by Rabindranath Tagore, to study comparative religion. As part of my course, I visited the holy shrine of Benares, where dead bodies floated by on the Ganges as part of a Hindu ritual of spiritual transition, and emaciated holy men knelt in prayer among goats and pigeons. Pilgrims, most in rags, but one in a gold sari, listened to the non-stop buzz of gurus and hawkers. It was chaotic, to be sure, and yet, in the middle of the chaos, I felt an unfathomable peace. I knew then that my life was never going to be lived on a serene mountaintop, but I also knew that it was possible to find peace and wisdom in the middle of a bustling marketplace, that we can achieve that elusive combination between stillness and the stream of the world, that we can be in the world, but not of the world. The 17th century French mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal said that all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. When we have learned to sit quietly in a room alone, we can maintain that inner connection that allows life to proceed from the inside out, whether we are alone or in a crowd of screaming people. And we can remain in this state of being no matter how much we're doing. It seems so simple, and when I'm in that place, I wonder why I ever leave it. But it takes tremendous commitment and dedication to hold to it, and when I slip out of it, to catch myself quickly, again and again and again, and without judgment. At HuffPost, we developed a course-correcting free smartphone app called GPS for the Soul. It provides tools to help us return to a state of calm and balance. I know it's something of a paradox to look to an app to help us reconnect to ourselves, but there's no reason not to use the technology we always have in our pockets or purses to help free us from technology. Think of it as spiritual training wheels. GPS for the Soul connects us to a personalized guide with music, poetry, breathing exercises, and pictures of our loved ones to help us de-stress and recenter. You can also access the guides of experts, other users, or your friends. It always amazes me how quickly I am able to move back to that centered place, and how it gets even easier as the path back becomes more and more familiar. We all have within us the ability to move from struggle to grace, whatever the challenges we encounter. When I'm in that bubble of grace, it doesn't mean that the everyday things that used to bother, irritate, and upset me disappear. They don't, but they no longer have the power to bother, irritate, or upset me. And when the really hard things come our way, death, sickness, loss, we are better able to deal with them instead of being overwhelmed by them. I faced one such big test on March 4th, 2012. That's the day I got the sort of call every parent dreads more than anything else. "Mommy, I can't breathe." It was Christina, my oldest daughter, in her senior year at Yale, 2 months away from graduating. Looking back on that March day as I was frantically driving from New York to the emergency room in New Haven, and later when we left the emergency room with my sedated daughter crying in my arms, and later still over the hard weeks that followed, I focused on all that I was grateful for. That my daughter was alive, that she had a loving family that rallied around her, and that she wanted to get well. Christina had struggled with drugs before, but we had thought that was behind her, and never before had it gotten to this point. Everything else I thought was important in my life fell away. Over the next year, until Christina decided to go public with her addiction, only our family, her closest friends, and my daughter's godmothers knew. I felt like it was her story and her life, and therefore, her decision if and when to talk about it. I was proud of her when, 13 months later, she decided to write about her struggle. Writing this blog a year ago would have been impossible because of the shame and the deep guilt I felt about being an addict. I have never been abused or neglected. I didn't grow up in an alcoholic home. I have been blessed with an unconditionally loving family, and I have been given every opportunity to thrive. Why then? Why cause the people who love me so much pain? Why be seemingly intent on throwing it all away? The honest answer is, I don't know. What I do know, and I have grappled with this over the past 13 months, is that addiction is a disease. It is progressive, it can be fatal, and it can touch anyone. My life as it is today was unthinkable 13 months ago. Yes, I mean the particulars. I have a steady job and healthy, loving relationships. But more than that, I've learned to be vulnerable. I've learned how to apologize and how to forgive. I've learned how much strength it takes to let go. If writing this can help one person feel a little less alone, if it encourages one person to ask for help, if it allows one person to know that no matter how hopeless it feels right now, it can get better, then that is enough. Here's what no one tells you about sobriety, Christina says. Giving up drugs is easy compared to dealing with the emotions drugs protected you from. Learning to be vulnerable without shame and accepting our emotions without judgment becomes much easier when we realize that we are more than our emotions, our thoughts, our fears, and our personalities. And the stronger the realization, the easier it becomes to move from struggle to grace. The harder we press on a violin string, the less we can feel it. The louder we play, the less we hear. If I try to play, I fail. If I race, I trip. The only road to strength is vulnerability. Stephen Nachmanovich. Moving from struggle to grace sums up as well the experience of childbirth. Going from a body racked with pain to the miracle of birth all in a few hours, if you're lucky. For all our medical advances, that miracle has never been diminished over the millennia. The staggering reality that we mortals can actually accomplish the act of human creation leaves us changed forever. It's a miracle that we honor with a yearly celebration until we die. Having longed to have children for years, I was over the moon when, at 38, I finally became a mother. A few hours after Christina's birth, I had another grace-filled experience that, as I've since discovered, an amazing number of women have also had. And as personal diaries from previous generations show, this is not just a modern phenomenon. I lay in bed, nestling Christina to me for hours. When I finally grew sleepy, we put her in the crib next to my bed. A few moments later, after everyone had left the room, I began trembling convulsively. I tried to calm myself with the same soothing words I had just offered to my baby. "It's all right. It's all right." And then I stopped shaking. I had left my body and was suddenly looking down at myself, at Christina, at the tuberoses on the nightstand, at the entire room. I had no fear at all. I knew I would return. And I was awash in an enormous sense of well-being and strength. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back to give me a glimpse of the wholeness of birth, life, and death. Seeing them all at once, I could accept them all, for I don't know how long I hovered in that state of almost tangible peace. Then I watched a nurse enter the room. As she touched me, she jolted me back into the hospital reality. I returned with a great sense of confidence and joy. The anxiety of taking Christina home had disappeared. I knew we would be fine. In our daily lives, moving from struggle to grace requires practice and commitment. But it's in our hands. I've come to believe that living in a state of gratitude is the gateway to grace. Gratitude has always been for me one of the most powerful emotions. Grace and gratitude have the same Latin root, gratus. Whenever we find ourselves in a stop the world I want to get off mindset, we can remember that there is another way and open ourselves to grace. And it often starts with taking a moment to be grateful for this day, for being alive, for anything. Christina found tremendous value during her recovery by doing a nightly list of all she was grateful for that day and sharing it with 3 friends who, in turn, emailed her their gratitude lists. And she has continued this practice to this day. The Oxford clinical psychologist Mark Williams suggests the 10-finger gratitude exercise, in which once a day you list 10 things you're grateful for and count them out on your fingers. Sometimes it won't be easy, but that's the point. Intentionally bringing into awareness the tiny, previously unnoticed elements of the day. Gratitude exercises have been proven to have tangible benefits. According to a study by researchers from the University of Minnesota and the University of Florida, having participants write down a list of positive events at the close of a day and why the events made them happy lowered their self-reported stress levels and gave them a greater sense of calm at night. I find that I'm not only grateful for all the blessings in my life, I'm also grateful for all that hasn't happened, for all those close shaves with disaster of some kind or another, all the bad things that almost happened but didn't. The distance between them happening and not happening is grace. And then there are the disasters that did happen, that leave us broken and in pain. For me, such a moment was losing my first baby. I was 36 and ecstatic at the prospect of becoming a mother. But night after night I had restless dreams. Night after night I could see that the baby, a boy, was growing within me, but his eyes would not open. Days became weeks, and weeks turned into months. Early one morning, barely awake myself, I asked out loud, "Why won't they open?" I knew then what was only later confirmed by the doctors. The baby's eyes were not meant to open. He died in my womb before he was born. Women know that we do not carry our unborn babies only in our wombs. We carry them in our dreams and in our souls and in our every cell. Losing a baby brings up so many unspoken fears. Will I ever be able to carry a baby to term? Will I ever be able to become a mother? Everything felt broken inside. As I lay awake during the many sleepless nights that followed, I began to sift through the shards and splinters, hoping to find reasons for my baby's stillbirth. Staggering through a minefield of hard questions and partial answers, I began to make my way toward healing. Dreams of my baby gradually faded, but for a time it seemed as if the grief itself would never lift. My mother had once given me a quotation from Aeschylus that spoke directly to these hours. "And even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, and in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom to us by the awful grace of God." At some point, I accepted the pain falling drop by drop and prayed for the wisdom to come. I had known pain before. Relationships had broken, illnesses had come, death had taken people I loved. But I had never known a pain like this. What I learned through it is that we are not on this earth to accumulate victories or trophies or experiences, or even to avoid failures, but to be whittled and sandpapered down until what's left is who we truly are. This is the only way we can find purpose in pain and loss, and the only way to keep returning to gratitude and grace. I love saying grace, even silently, before meals and when I travel around the world, observing different traditions. When I was in Tokyo in 2013 for the launch of HuffPost Japan, I loved learning to say itadakimasu before every meal. It simply means I receive. When I was in Dharamsala, India, every meal started with a simple prayer. Growing up in Greece, I was used to a simple blessing before each meal, sometimes a silent one, even though I wasn't brought up in a particularly religious household. Grace isn't something that you go for, as much as it's something you allow, wrote John Roger, the founder of the movement of spiritual inner awareness. However, you may not know grace is present because you have conditioned the way you want it to come, for example, like thunder or lightning, with all the drama, rumbling, and pretense of that. In fact, grace comes in very naturally, like breathing. On a day when the wind is perfect, the sail just needs to open and the world is full of beauty. Today is such a day. Rumi. Both monks and scientists have affirmed the importance of gratitude in our lives. "It is a glorious destiny to be a member of the human race," wrote Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk from Kentucky. "Though it is a race dedicated to many absurdities and one which makes many terrible mistakes. Yet, with all that, God himself gloried in becoming a member of the human race." A member of the human race. To think that such a commonplace realization should suddenly seem like news that one holds the winning ticket in a cosmic sweepstake. What the foremost researchers in the field of gratitude, Robert Emmons of the University of California, Davis, and Michael McCullough of the University of Miami, have established is that a life oriented around gratefulness is the panacea for insatiable yearnings and life's ills. At the cornerstone of gratitude is the notion of undeserved merit. The grateful person recognizes that he or she did nothing to deserve the gift or benefit. It was freely bestowed. Gratitude works its magic by serving as an antidote to negative emotions. It's like white blood cells for the soul, protecting us from cynicism, entitlement, anger, and resignation. It's summed up in a quote I love, attributed to Imam al-Shafi'i, an 8th century Muslim jurist. "My heart is at ease knowing that what was meant for me will never miss me, and that what misses me was never meant for me." The power of the hunch. When your inner voice speaks, shut up and listen. One big indicator of the absence of wisdom is our failure to heed warning signs. History is filled with examples. The consequences of ignoring warning signs came to life for me a few years ago when I was visiting Pompeii. Walking around the ancient city, I was reminded how its people were wiped out in AD 79 by a volcanic eruption. There had been many warning signs, including a severe earthquake in AD 62, tremors over the ensuing years, springs and wells that dried up, dogs that ran away, and birds that no longer sang. And then the most obvious warning sign: columns of smoke belching out of Mount Vesuvius before the volcano blew its top, burying the city and its inhabitants under 60 feet of ash and volcanic rock. The warning tremors had been dismissed as not particularly alarming. The warning signs of impending catastrophes are all around us today, pointing out the gulf between what we know we should be doing on climate change, on growing economic inequalities, on the failed war on drugs, and what we're choosing to do instead. And the source of this gulf is an absence of wisdom. One big source of wisdom is intuition, our inner knowing. We've all experienced it, a hunch, an inkling, our inner voice telling us to do something or not to do something. We hear the message and it feels right, even if we can't explain why. Or for those of us who are more visual, we see something. A flickering insight, sometimes gone by the time it has registered if we don't learn to pay attention to it. The smile on the face of a child seen from the window of our train rushing by a playground. Even when we're not at a fork in the road, wondering what to do and trying to hear that inner voice, our intuition is always there, always reading the situation, always trying to steer us the right way. But can we hear it? Are we paying attention? Are we living a life that keeps the pathway to our intuition unblocked, feeding and nurturing our intuition, and living a life in which we can make use of its wisdom is one key way to thrive at work and in life. Intuition, not intellect, is the open sesame of yourself. Albert Einstein. There are some for whom the word intuition conjures the idea of hippy-dippy New Age thinking, or something to do with the paranormal. But in fact, from the beginning of recorded history, we have had the recognition of a kind of wisdom that is not the product of logic and reason. Western culture is a monument to reason. It gave us the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and the Information Age, and all that has followed. But it wasn't reason alone that gave us those triumphs, nor is it reason alone that gets us through the day. The 3rd century philosopher Plotinus wrote that there are 3 kinds of knowledge: opinion, science, illumination. The means or instrument of the first is sense, of the second, dialectic, of the third, intuition. The internet has made the first 2 types of knowledge very easy to come by. But it has taken us further away from that illumination, or wisdom, that is essential to living a life that matters. Science has confirmed how important intuition is in the way we make decisions. It has long been realized, psychologists Martin Seligman and Michael Kahana wrote, that many important decisions are not arrived at by linear reasoning, but by intuition. They go on to describe intuition-based decision-making as A. Rapid, B. Not conscious, C. Used for decisions involving multiple dimensions, D. Based on vast stores of prior experiences, E. Characteristic of experts, F. Not easily or accurately articulated afterwards, and G. Often made with high confidence. There's a reason why we feel that our intuition comes from deep inside, why it's referred to sometimes as a gut instinct or a feeling in your bones. It's because it's part of the core of our internal wiring. In his book Blink, Malcolm Gladwell describes how that core, the adaptive unconscious, functions as a kind of giant computer that quickly and quietly processes a lot of the data we need in order to keep functioning as human beings. Indeed, the point of Blink was how the reading of a situation by our adaptive unconscious or intuition can actually be much more accurate than our conscious, well-thought-out take. Gladwell tells the story of a kouros, a statue from ancient Greece, acquired by the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles. A team of scientists, after many tests, vouched for its authenticity. But a few art historians, including Thomas Hoving, former director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, instantly knew otherwise. Hoving felt an intuitive repulsion for the piece. In the first 2 seconds of looking, in a single glance, writes Gladwell, they were able to understand more about the essence of the statue than the team at the Getty was able to understand after 14 months. Could they explain why they knew? Gladwell asks. Not at all, but they knew. And they turned out to be right. It was a fake. In his book, Sources of Power, How People Make Decisions, Gary Klein tells the story of a group of firemen fighting a fire inside a one-story house, spraying water at the flames in the kitchen. The lieutenant starts to feel as if something is not right. He doesn't have any clues. He just doesn't feel right about being in that house, so he orders his men out of the building, a perfectly standard building with nothing out of the ordinary. The commander later said that he couldn't explain what had led him to shout the warning, attributing it to a sixth sense. It was a very good thing that he did, because just after the men followed his order and left, the floor they'd been standing on collapsed. The fire, it turned out, had been centered right below them in the basement, which he had no clue even existed. Klein also recounts a story of experienced nurses in a neonatal intensive care unit who could tell when a premature baby had sepsis despite conflicting symptoms, a crucial thing to know, since an infection could be fatal if not immediately treated. Often the nurses would know even before the test results came up positive. When he asked them how they knew, they said, intuition. They looked, Klein writes. They knew. End of story. Their intuition, it turned out, was based on subtle clues that the nurses themselves would be hard put to articulate, but they drew the proper conclusion in an instant. We all know we have access to intuition if we nourish it and listen to it. We know that our intuition can be more accurate than trying to bear down on a problem with cold, hard logic. And we know that the consequences of listening to, or not listening to, our intuition can be, literally, a matter of life or death. So why do we so often ignore or disregard that inner voice in our lives? I'm certainly not immune. I think about how often in my life I have ignored those whisperings, how easy it is to dismiss them or brush them aside or get so busy and harried that I simply don't take the time to listen. And often, it's because I haven't got a rational explanation for why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. But of course, that's precisely why we should pay attention. That is part of what wisdom, as opposed to logic or data, is all about. Let's say you're walking home one night. You come upon a dark alley and you feel a little uneasy, a slight discomfort, a version of what the fire commander called his sixth sense. Your inner voice, your adaptive subconscious says, don't go down this alley. But you're in a hurry, so you do, albeit nervously. If your intuition is right, the consequences could be severe. Or let's say you are interviewing to fill a vacant position at work. You feel a slight twinge of unease with a prospective candidate. But you're in a hurry, and the individual's qualifications seem strong on paper. The position has been open for a while and it must be filled, so you override your intuition and hire the person. That is how so many hiring mistakes are made. Or you're talking to your child and, distracted by other thoughts or a text you just received, you ignore a little niggle about something she was saying, or was not saying. Sometimes, what your intuitive response signals is that you need more information. But our modern, hyper-connected world throws up roadblock after roadblock between us and our intuition. It can get buried under a groaning email inbox, the constant chirping of our smartphones, or our running from appointment to appointment, stressed and burned out. If our intuitive voice had the same strength of signal bars our phones do, we'd often see that we're out of range of our wisdom. The longer we wait to defend our intuitions, the less we will have to defend, Gary Klein writes. We are more than the sum of our software programs and analytical methods, more than the databases we can access, more than the procedures we have been asked to memorize. The choice is whether we are going to shrink into these artifacts or expand beyond them. For me, the easiest way to lose touch with my intuition is to be sleep-deprived. As we saw in the well-being section, sleep deprivation lowers not just our attention span, focus, and memory. It also affects our emotional intelligence, self-esteem, and empathy toward others. And when we're sleep-deprived, we're more likely to cross ethical lines because lack of sleep depletes our self-control. Our behavior and our character are not set in stone. They can be affected by how recharged and centered we are. Meditation, yoga, and mindfulness can help us to still the noise of the world so we can listen to our inner voice. During my pregnancies with Christina and Isabella, I practiced yoga every day. It was a discipline I inherited from my mother, who could stand on her head for what seemed like hours when we were growing up in Athens. So it was a kind of family tradition, though one I rebelled against before finally embracing it. In the concentration and relaxation, the inner discipline and outer postures, I feel aligned, a balance that stays with me long after the yoga mats are rolled away. One of the people who helped popularize meditation and yoga in the West was Paramahansa Yogananda. Here's how he put the need to take care of our intuitive inner selves in his 1946 autobiography of a yogi. Intuition is soul guidance, appearing naturally in man during those instants when his mind is calm. Nearly everyone has had the experience of an inexplicably correct hunch, or has transferred his thoughts effectively to another person. The human mind, free from the static of restlessness, can perform through its antenna of intuition all the functions of complicated radio mechanisms, sending and receiving thoughts and tuning out undesirable ones. This was the book that Steve Jobs had asked to be given out at his memorial. Jobs had spent some time in India and was particularly taken with the role of intuition in our lives. The people in the Indian countryside don't use their intellect like we do. They use their intuition instead, and their intuition is far more developed than in the rest of the world, Jobs said. Intuition is a very powerful thing, more powerful than intellect, in my opinion. That's had a big impact on my work. Intuition is about connections, but connections that aren't obvious and that can't be reasoned into existence. Our intuition connects us both to our inner selves and to something larger beyond ourselves and our lives. But it's incredibly easy to become disconnected from it. And with the pressures and pace of modern life, without deliberate effort, it's more likely than not that we will stay disconnected. Our intuition is like a tuning fork that keeps us in harmony, if we learn to listen. It helps us live more of our lives from that still center in us that Marcus Aurelius called our inner citadel. What is beyond doubt is that we spend most of our life outside that citadel. The key is course correcting. The ability to do that and recognize that we need to are skills we can learn and get better at simply through practice. Indeed, we can learn to course correct faster and faster and bring ourselves back to that place of stillness, imperturbability, and loving, until it becomes second nature to return quickly to what is our true nature. You learn to speak by speaking, to study by studying, to run by running, to work by working, and just so you learn to love by loving. Francis de Sales. In that quiet center there is perspective and balance and a recognition of what really matters. I sadly saw this unfold when, in his 70s, my father began to lose his eyesight until, and this, he said, was his greatest regret, he could no longer tell his two granddaughters apart. He had survived a German concentration camp, years of financial hardship, divorce, and myriad disappointments. He had a brilliant intellect and the soul of a poet, but also an erratic temper and a love affair with gambling and drinking. When his diabetes led to macular degeneration, and he was unable to read or write, he was devastated. These had been the great passions he thought would occupy his later years. Instead, he was forced to turn inward. And, as my sister put it, inside him was a neglected garden that had not been watered or weeded for a long, long time, with a gate to his heart firmly closed. If we could read the sign on the gate, it would probably say, "No entry. Explosive materials inside." There were brief moments when he would let his guard down and let the gate open a little, but then it would promptly close shut. It took something as tragic as losing his eyesight before he could start tending his inner garden. Eye paradox. Your smartphone isn't making you wiser. One of the things that makes it harder and harder to connect with our wisdom is our increasing dependence on technology. Our hyper-connectedness is the snake lurking in our digital Garden of Eden. People have a pathological relationship with their devices, says Kelly McGonigal, a psychologist who studies the science of self-control at Stanford's School of Medicine. People feel not just addicted, but trapped. We are finding it harder and harder to unplug and renew ourselves. Professor Mark Williams sums up the damage we're doing to ourselves. What we know from the neuroscience. From looking at the brain scans of people that are always rushing around, who never taste their food, who are always going from one task to another without actually realizing what they're doing, is that the emotional part of the brain that drives people is on high alert all the time. So when people think I'm rushing around to get things done, it's almost like biologically they're rushing around just as if they were escaping from a predator. That's the part of the brain that's active. But nobody can run fast enough to escape their own worries. Mindfulness, on the other hand, cultivates our ability to do things knowing that we're doing them. In other words, we become aware that we're aware. It's an incredibly important tool, and one that we can't farm out to technology. There are some who believe the increasing power of big data, using powerful computers to sift through and find patterns in massive amounts of information, is going to rival the human consciousness at some point. But there's also growing skepticism about how effective big data is at solving problems. As Nassim Taleb, the author of The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable, writes, "Big data may mean more information, but it also means more false information. And even when the information is not false, the problem is that the needle comes in an increasingly larger haystack." There are many things big data does poorly, writes David Brooks. When making decisions about social relationships, it's foolish to swap the amazing machine in your skull for the crude machine on your desk. The quest for knowledge may be pursued at higher speeds with smarter tools today, but wisdom is found no more readily than it was 3,000 years ago in the court of King Solomon. In fact, ours is a generation bloated with information and starved for wisdom. At the Aspen Ideas Festival in 2013, one of the best speeches I heard was by Harvard Business School professor Nancy Cohn. "What we need," said Cohn, "is wisdom, because information does not equal knowledge, and knowledge does not equal understanding, and understanding does not equal wisdom. Aren't we searching like frisky pilgrims through the desert for that right here, right now?" At HuffPost, we started a section titled Screen Sense, devoted to our addiction to our devices, and publishing the latest scientific studies, reports, and explorations about how technology is impacting our lives, our health, and our relationships. The price for this addiction is high. More than 3,000 deaths and 400,000 injuries nationwide are caused by distracted driving and especially texting, which the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration calls by far the most alarming distraction. In her opening post titled Mom's Digital Diet, Lori Leibovich, HuffPost's executive lifestyle editor, wrote about the family vacation she recently took that included a vacation from her phone. She told her kids, "If you see me doing anything on my iPhone besides taking pictures, take it away from me." Like all diets, it wasn't always easy to stay on, but there were rewards. "Yes," she writes, "there were moments when I felt existentially lost without the iPhone's Pavlovian ping alerting me to a new message or tweet. But it also felt exhilarating to use my hands for digging tunnels in the sand and turning the pages of a novel instead of just for tapping away on a screen. For the first time in I don't know how long, I was really seeing my kids, and they were relishing being seen." Disconnection is a two-way street. Caroline Knorr from Common Sense Media wrote about a study conducted by her nonprofit that found that 72% of children under the age of 8 and 38% of children under the age of 2 have already started using mobile devices. According to Stephanie Donaldson-Pressman, clinical director of the New England Center for Pediatric Psychology, clinically, we are seeing an increase in symptoms typically associated with anxiety and depression, which include short-term memory problems, decreased attention span, sleep deprivation, excessive moodiness, and general dissatisfaction. While the average 8 to 10-year-old spends nearly 8 hours a day with a variety of different media, and older children and teenagers spend more than 11 hours per day, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends children and teens have no more than 1 to 2 hours a day of entertainment screen time. And screen media exposure of any kind is discouraged for children under 2 years old. The key to these recommendations is having parents model healthy, non-addictive behavior. Louis C.K. has put a brilliant comedic mirror in front of us and our screen addictions. In one of his routines, he captures the absurdity of children's events, where none of the parents is actually able to watch the soccer game or school play, or kindergarten graduation because they're straining to record it on video with their devices, blocking their vision of their actual child. We are so hell-bent on recording our children's milestones that we miss them altogether. The resolution on the kid is unbelievable if you just look, he jokes. It's totally HD. File it under be careful what you wish for. Big data, unfettered information, the ability to be in constant contact, and our growing reliance on technology are all conspiring to create a noisy traffic jam between us and our place of insight and peace. Call it an eye paradox. Our smartphones are actually blocking our path to wisdom. Hurry, sickness, and time famine. In the summer of 2013, a blog post on the Huffington Post became an unexpected overnight sensation, with more than 7 million page views and nearly 1.2 million Facebook likes. It was entitled "The Day I Stopped Saying Hurry Up," and was written by Rachel Macy Stafford, a special education teacher and mother of a 6-year-old girl. Rachel's life, as she writes, was controlled by electronic notifications, ringtones, and jam-packed agendas. But one day she painfully realized the impact she was having on her daughter. A laid-back, carefree, stop-and-smell-the-roses type of child. I was a bully who pushed and pressured and hurried a small child who simply wanted to enjoy life. The reason the post struck such a chord beyond our guilt about the way we parent was because so many recognize the damage we do when we constantly tell not just our children but ourselves to hurry up. Children are much more connected to the moment, and much less connected, yoked actually, to the artificial constructs of time that we've imposed on ourselves, and for which we've appointed our devices as rigid enforcers. Rachel's story was a reminder of just how much we can learn from our children when it comes to the importance of living in the moment. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began. So is it now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old. Or let me die. The child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. William Wordsworth. It turns out that, not surprisingly, mastering the art of slowing down doesn't happen quickly. Learning the wisdom of slowing down, of truly living, is itself a journey. But it is also a prescription for better health. A study led by Lijing L. Yan at Northwestern University found that young adults exhibiting time urgency and impatience had a higher risk of developing hypertension. And rushing can lead to packing on the pounds when we bring our obsession with speed to the table. As nutrition expert Kathleen M. Zellman says, it takes approximately 20 minutes from the time you start eating for your brain to send out signals of fullness. Leisurely eating allows ample time to trigger the signal from your brain that you are full. And feeling full translates into eating less. New studies have confirmed that eating more slowly leads to lower calorie consumption. Even sex is better when slow, since stress from rushing inhibits production of dopamine, a chemical that affects libido. Research published in the Harvard Business Review shows that speed adversely affects creativity and work. When creativity is under the gun, it usually ends up getting killed. Complex cognitive processing takes time, and without some reasonable time for that processing, creativity is almost impossible. Our culture is obsessed with time. It is our personal deficit crisis. We always think we're saving time, and yet we feel like we never have enough of it. In order to manage time, or what we delude ourselves into thinking of as managing time, we rigidly schedule ourselves, rushing from meeting to meeting, event to event, constantly trying to save a bit of time here, a bit there. We download apps for productivity and eagerly click on articles with time-saving life hacks. We try to shave a few seconds off our daily routine, in hopes that we can create enough space to schedule yet another meeting or appointment that will help us climb the ladder of success. Like airlines, we routinely overbook ourselves, fearful of any unused capacity, confident that we can fit everything in. We fear that if we don't cram as much as possible into our day, we might miss out on something fabulous, important, special, or career-advancing. But there are no rollover minutes in life. We don't get to keep all that time we save. It's actually a very costly way to live. We suffer from an epidemic of what James Gleick's book, Faster, the acceleration of just about everything, calls hurry sickness. Our computers, our movies, our sex lives, our prayers, They all run faster now than ever before. And the more we fill our lives with time-saving devices and time-saving strategies, the more rushed we feel. Harvard professor Leslie Perlow has given this feeling a name: time famine. Feeling like you're experiencing time famine has very real consequences, from increased stress to diminished satisfaction with your life. On the flip side, the feeling of having enough time, or even surplus time, is called time affluence. And though it may be hard to believe, it's actually possible to achieve. Her heart sat silent through the noise and concourse of the street. There was no hurry in her hands, no hurry in her feet. Christina Rossetti. Some people are naturally time affluent. My mother, for instance. In fact, when it came to time, she was filthy rich. She moved through her days like a child does, living in the present, stopping, literally, to smell the roses. A trip through the farmer's market might be an all-day affair with little thought of all the things that must be done. I still often think of the advice she'd give my sister and me when we were faced with a hard decision. Darling, let it marinate. In other words, give yourself the time to think about and live with the consequences of the decision. She was a towering example of the joys of slowing down. Until her death in 2000, she and I had an unspoken deal. Hers would be the rhythm of a timeless world, a child's rhythm. Mine was the rhythm of the modern world. While I had the sense every time I looked at my watch that it was later than I thought, she lived in a world where there were no impersonal encounters and never a need to rush. She believed that rushing through life was a sure way to miss the gifts that come only when you give 100% of yourself to a task, a conversation, a dinner, a relationship, a moment, which is why she despised multitasking. As it turns out, it's my mother's luxurious sense of time, rather than my own struggle against perpetual time famine, that's apparently closer to the scientific reality of time. As physicist Paul Davies wrote in Scientific American, though most of us feel time is something that flows, always coming at us and then rushing behind us, that's not actually what happens. Physicists prefer to think of time as laid out in its entirety. A timescape, analogous to a landscape with all past and future events located there together. It is a notion sometimes referred to as block time. I love this because block time helps me see the big picture. There is literally both no time and all the time in the world. Sadly, I am living proof that time affluence is not an inherited trait. But if you're not born time affluent, there are things you can do to turn your time famine into a feast. Studies have shown that, as Keith O'Brien wrote in the Boston Globe, small acts, simple emotions such as awe, and even counterintuitive measures like spending time doing tasks for someone else, essentially giving time away, can make us feel more time affluent. It's not just that people felt less impatient, said Jennifer Aker, a Stanford business professor and co-author of a study on people's perception of time, but they reported higher levels of subjective well-being. They actually felt better in their lives. Just as money can't buy happiness, neither can it buy time affluence. According to a 2011 Gallup poll, the more money you have, the more likely you are to suffer from time famine. The study concluded that those at the top of the income spectrum are among the most likely to be time poor. Not surprisingly, when it comes to winning the war on time famine, we are our own worst enemies. To win the war, first we have to declare that we want to change. According to a 2008 Pew report, when asked what was important to them, 68% of Americans replied, having free time. It ranked even higher than having children, in which came in at 62%, and a successful career at 59%. Yet the way many of us choose to live doesn't reflect those priorities. As long as success is defined by who works the longest hours, who goes the longest without a vacation, who sleeps the least, who responds to an email at midnight or 5 in the morning, in essence, who is suffering from the biggest time famine, we're never going to be able to enjoy the benefits of time affluence. And while time affluence isn't inherited, it's clear that we're doing a pretty good job of passing our self-destructive relationship with time onto our children. Not getting enough sleep definitely puts you on the road to time famine. Vatsal Thakar, a psychiatry professor at the NYU School of Medicine, has suggested that many cases of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children are in fact sleep disorders. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, An astounding 11% of school-age children have received a diagnosis of ADHD. Sleep-deprived children, writes Thakkar, become hyperactive and unfocused. In one study he cites, a sleep disorder was found in every single one of 34 children diagnosed with ADHD. Sleep, he notes, is especially crucial for children who need the deep, slow-wave type of sleep called delta sleep. Compared to 100 years ago, today's children get a full hour less of sleep per night. And the answer is not as simple as choosing an earlier bedtime. It's about changing how we overschedule our children's days so that they can begin their nights sooner. We protect our children in unprecedented ways, from car seats to packing their lunches in containers made with BPA-free plastic to shopping for organic food. But we apply less care and vigilance to our children's time diets, even though the benefits of time affluence outweigh all those trips to soccer and violin practice. In William Faulkner's book, The Sound and the Fury, Quentin Compson's father gives him a watch. "I give it to you not that you may remember time, but that you might forget it now and then for a moment and not spend all your breath trying to conquer it." So what can we do to fight back against hurry sickness? You can walk, don't run, to join the slow movement. As Carl Honoré, the author of In Praise of Slowness, put it, "Speed can be fun, productive, and powerful, and we would be poorer without it." What the world needs and what the slow movement offers is a middle path, a recipe for marrying la dolce vita with the dynamism of the information age. The secret is balance. Instead of doing everything faster, do everything at the right speed, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes in between. For Honoré, the turning point that led him to become one of the godfathers of the burgeoning slow movement happened nearly 10 years ago. He was at the airport in Rome, waiting for his flight home and talking to his editor on his cell phone. Like far too many of us, he says. At the time he was wired and harried, a Scrooge with a stopwatch, obsessed with saving every last scrap of time, a minute here, a few seconds there. While in line and on the phone, to make his time even more productive, he started skimming a newspaper when a headline caught his eye. The 1-minute bedtime story. The article was about a volume in which classic children's books are condensed down to 60 seconds. Eureka, he thought to himself. As the father of a 2-year-old son, he saw the book as a great bedtime time saver. He started making a mental note to order the book as soon as he got home. Suddenly, he caught himself wondering, have I gone completely insane? The slow food movement was launched in Italy in 1989 with a manifesto to push back against the spread of fast food, focusing on local food, sustainability, and eating as a social act of connection. Italians have other great traditions to draw from in preventing burnout. The riposo, the period of rest in the afternoon, and the evening stroll, the passeggiata, a time to disconnect from the pressures of the day. And now the slow movement has widened to include slow travel, slow living, slow sex, slow parenting, slow science, slow gardening, slow cities, and now slow thinking. Slow thinking is intuitive, woolly, and creative, wrote Carl Honoré. It is what we do when the pressure is off, and there is time to let ideas simmer on the back burner. It yields rich, nuanced insights and sometimes surprising breakthroughs. The future will belong to those who can innovate, and innovation comes from knowing when to slow down. We are not going to eliminate watches, appointments, and deadlines, although it's worth remembering that the word deadline has its American origin in Civil War prison camps. Instead of a physical perimeter, there would often be an imaginary line, the deadline, that the prisoners were not to cross. Our current use of the word isn't too far from its origin. Today, we often use deadlines, real and imaginary, to imprison ourselves. Everything changed the day she figured out there was exactly enough time for the important things in her life. Brian Andreas. Gaining a sense of time affluence can help lead us to both greater well-being and deeper wisdom. Not a bad thing to put on top of our ever-expanding to-do lists, but to do that, we'll have to address the relationship between our sense of time and technology. Our digital devices both reflect and amplify our hurry sickness. We use technology to save time, or so we think, but we also impose our distorted sense of time on our technology and use of social media. There are countless examples of how social media have been a force for good. They can accelerate raising awareness about issues and leading people to action. From Tahrir Square to Tripoli to Tehran to Tucson, social media have made it easier to organize, share information, and protest injustice. During natural disasters, they have served as a lifeline to vital information. And as Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen put it in their book, The New Digital Age, they strengthen the bonds of culture, language, and perspective between diaspora communities and their home countries. Whether it's college humor teaming up with malaria, no more, and raising over $750,000 to fight malaria, or tens of thousands of people contributing videos to the It Gets Better campaign to prevent LGBT suicides, or people rallying to raise money through GoFundMe for Glenn James, a homeless Boston man who returned a lost backpack with $40,000 in it, social media have made it easier to harness our collective power for good. But going viral has gone viral, and is taken to be a big sign of success independently of the value of the thing going viral. It doesn't matter, is often the assumption, as long as it's viral and social. Indeed, in the media world, the fetishization of social media has reached idol-worshipping proportions. Media conference agendas are filled with panels devoted to social media and how to use social tools to amplify coverage. But you rarely hear anyone discussing the value of the story that they want so badly to go viral. Our media culture is locked in the perpetual now, constantly chasing ephemeral scoops that last only seconds and that most often don't matter or have any impact in the first place, even for the brief moments that they're exclusive. Michael Calderon, HuffPost's senior media reporter, writes, "Nothing is too inconsequential to be made consequential. The ersatz urgent has overtaken the truly important." "We are in great haste," wrote Thoreau in 1854, "to construct a magnetic telegraph from Maine to Texas, but Maine, and Texas it may be, have nothing important to communicate. Today, we are in great haste to celebrate something going viral, but seem completely unconcerned whether the thing that went viral added one iota of anything good or worthwhile, including just simple amusement, to our lives. We treat virality as a good in and of itself, moving forward for the sake of moving." "Hey," someone might ask, "where are you going?" "I don't know, but I'm moving really fast." Not a very effective way to end up in a better place. Of course, our team at HuffPost is as aggressive as any media outlet in using social media. But maybe because we've been doing social well for a while, I hope we're better able and more willing to see it for what it is, a tool, not a magical feat. How many times is the discussion of a topic justified by the fact that it's trending on Twitter? Is it really meaningful that sentiment on Twitter is breaking 80-1 against such and such? Is something important because it has 3,000 likes on Facebook? In fact, trending on Twitter may not mean much of anything at all, except an indication of what's dominating the conversation at that particular moment. There were 24.1 million tweets during the 2013 Super Bowl, for example, and 10,901 tweets per second during Adele's Record of the Year win at the Grammys. But as Twitter's Rachel Horowitz wrote to me, Twitter's algorithm favors novelty over popularity. The bottom line is that you can use Twitter to talk obsessively about Miley Cyrus twerking at the Video Music Awards. There were an astounding 306,000 tweets per minute. Or you can use Twitter as sites such as Kickstarter and Donors. Choose do, to make a difference by leveraging the power of social media to crowdfund creative projects, or to help teachers fund urgent classroom needs. As we adopt new and better ways to help people communicate, it is important to ask what is being communicated. And what's the opportunity cost of what is not being communicated while we're locked in the perpetual present chasing whatever is trending? Social media are a means, not an end. Going viral isn't mission accomplished. Fetishizing social has become a major distraction, and we love to be distracted. I believe our job in the media is to use the social tools at our disposal to tell the stories that matter, as well as the stories that entertain, and to keep reminding ourselves that the tools are not the story. When we become too obsessed with our closed circular Twitter or Facebook ecosystem, we can easily forget that poverty is on the rise, or that downward mobility is trending upward, or that millions of people in the United States, and even more so in Europe and around the world, have fallen into chronic unemployment, and that 400 million children around the world are living in extreme poverty. On the other side of the spectrum, too often we ignore the great instances of compassion, ingenuity, and innovation shown by people who are changing lives and communities by trying to address these problems. Our times demand a better response. These new social tools can help us bear witness more powerfully, or they can help us be distracted more obsessively. We all have a relationship with technology. The question is this: how healthy is that relationship going to be? It's an important question because it affects how healthy and how wise we ourselves will be. Our attention is the fuel that drives our lives, or as Viral Mehta, co-founder of ServiceSpace, put it, the clay with which we mold our days. No matter what people say about what they value, what matters is where they put their attention. When technology eats up our attention, it's eating up our life. And when we accumulate projects on our to-do list, they eat up our attention even if unconsciously, and even if we never start them. I did a major life audit when I turned 40, and I realized how many projects I had committed to in my head, such as learning German and becoming a good skier and learning to cook. Most remained unfinished, and many were not even started. Yet these countless incomplete projects drained my energy and diffused my attention. As soon as the file was opened, each one took a little bit of me away. It was very liberating to realize that I could complete a project by simply dropping it, by eliminating it from my to-do list. Why carry around this unnecessary baggage? That's how I completed learning German and becoming a good skier and learning to cook and a host of other projects that now no longer have a claim on my attention. Evicting the obnoxious roommate in your head. Even our worst enemies don't talk about us the way we talk to ourselves. I call this voice the obnoxious roommate living in our head. It feeds on putting us down and strengthening our insecurities and doubts. I wish someone would invent a tape recorder that we could attach to our brains to record everything we tell ourselves. We would realize how important it is to stop this negative self-talk. It means pushing back against our obnoxious roommate with a dose of wisdom. My personal obnoxious roommate is incredibly sardonic. Once when I was on Stephen Colbert's show, I told Stephen that my obnoxious roommate sounded exactly like him. "I had to find a place to crash," he replied. I have spent many years trying to evict my obnoxious roommate and have now managed to relegate her to only occasional guest appearances in my head. What makes our liberation from these voices harder is that so much of the news and information directed at women these days seems determined to reinforce our obnoxious roommates and make us feel that our lives are somehow lacking. We are constantly made to feel that we should be prettier, thinner, sexier, more successful, make more money, be better moms, better wives, better lovers, etc. Though often wrapped in a "you go girl" message, the subtext is clear. We should feel bad because we have fallen short in so many ways from some imagined ideal. We have tummies, not abs. We are undesirable because we don't always feel like sex kittens, or because we do. We are incompetent because we don't have a color-coded filing system for our recipes or papers. We are not trying hard enough because we are not a senior vice president or on a corporate board or in a corner office. Even the very existence of the phrase "having it all," no matter how it's debated, is, in effect, implying that we're somehow not measuring up. Educating our obnoxious roommate requires redefining success and what it means to live a life that matters, which will be different for each of us according to our own values and goals, and not those imposed upon us by society. Humor helps in dealing with that constant inner critic. Angels fly because they take themselves lightly, my mother used to tell my sister and me, quoting G.K. Chesterton. What also worked was sending myself a consistent and coherent alternative message. Since my roommate fed on my fears and negative fantasies, the message that resonated with me the most was the message with which John Roger ends all his seminars. The blessings already are. Or as Julian of Norwich, the 15th century English mystic, put it, "And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." Or as Sophocles' Oedipus cried out, "Despite so many ordeals, my advanced age and the nobility of my soul make me conclude that all is well." I keep repeating it to myself until I am bathed in this calm and reassuring message, which has the added advantage of being true. So find your own message. Don't let your constant critic filibuster your dreams. If you walk in with fear and anger, you'll find fear and anger. Go into situations with what you want to find there. When you worry, you're holding pictures in your mind that you want less of. What you focus upon, you become. What you focus on comes to you. So hold in your mind what you want more of. John Roger, Breaking Bad Habits. What we can learn from Minotaurs, seatbelts, and the Stoics. I've always been fascinated by the story of Ariadne, Theseus, and the Minotaur. Not just because Ariadne is my given name, but because of the role of the thread in mythology and in our everyday lives. Theseus could be saved and be free to return to Athens only if he entered the labyrinth and slew the Minotaur. All who had gone before him had perished, but Theseus, guided by the thread Ariadne had given him, was able to make his way into the labyrinth and come out of it alive and victorious. Ariadne's thread is our way in and our way out. It connects this world with the other, the outer with the inner, mortality with eternity. As we are liberating ourselves, building new habits and slaying our old habits, our own minotaurs, it is critical to find the thread that works for us. When we do, no matter what life throws our way, we can use the thread to help us navigate the labyrinth of daily life and come back to our center. For me, the thread is something as simple as my breath. I have worked to integrate certain practices into my day: meditation, walking, exercise, but the connection that conscious breathing gives me is something I can return to hundreds of times during the day in an instant. A conscious focus on breathing helps me introduce pauses into my daily life, brings me back into the moment, and helps me transcend upsets and setbacks. It has also helped me become much more aware when I hold or constrict my breath, not just when dealing with a problem, but sometimes even when I'm doing something as mundane as putting a key in the door, texting, reading an email, or going over my schedule. When I use my breath to relax the contracted core of my body, I can follow this thread back to my center. After all, computers crash, people die, relationships fall apart. The best we can do is breathe and reboot. Carrie Bradshaw in Sex and the City. As psychologist Karen Horneffer-Ginter asks, why are so many of us so awful at taking breaks? What is it about our culture and conditioning as adults that prevents us from stepping away from our seemingly important tasks in order to briefly recharge? If I were to make up banners and flyers in support of the break movement, they'd have to speak to our tendencies to exhaust ourselves to continue on, past the point that's really in our best interests, or even in the best interests of the project we're working on. Habits are habits for a reason. Humans lead complex lives, and one of the traits we've developed that has allowed us to be such productive creatures is the ability to make many learned traits and responses an automatic part of our lives, buried so deeply in the inner workings of our subconscious that they no longer require conscious thought. As mathematician Alfred North Whitehead wrote in 1911, it is a profoundly erroneous truism that we should cultivate the habit of thinking of what we are doing. The precise opposite is the case. Civilization advances by extending the number of important operations which we can perform without thinking about them. Indeed, research by John Bargh of Yale and Tanya Chartrand of Duke suggests that the lion's share of a person's behavior is dictated by mental processes that aren't conscious. Some of these habits are useful and some are not. Some start out being useful and become destructive later on or in different contexts. But the internal machinery we've developed to create them doesn't discriminate. And whether good or bad, once established, habits rapidly grow roots and entrench themselves in our lives. And that's the problem. Habits are a lot easier to learn than to unlearn, easier to bury than to exhume. An old Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. "A fight is going on inside me," he said to the boy. "It is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego." He continued, "The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside you, and inside every other person too. The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, "Which wolf will win?" The old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." Cherokee legend. The puzzle of habits, of learning and unlearning them, has been a focus of humanity since the dawn of civilization. Of the 10 Commandments, several are about resisting bad habits, such as coveting, and some are about cultivating good habits, such as honoring your parents. To Aristotle, habit's but a long practice, which becomes men's nature in the end. To Ovid, nothing is stronger than habit. And as Benjamin Franklin put it, "'Tis easier to prevent bad habits than to break them." Charles Duhigg explains in The Power of Habit that scientists at MIT have, in essence, mapped the habit genome. What they've found is that the nucleus of a habit is made up of a neurological loop, which has 3 parts. It begins with a cue that sends the message to the brain to switch on the automatic mode. Next comes the routine, what we think of as the habit itself, which can be psychological, emotional, or physical. And last is the reward, the cue that tells the brain to reinforce this process. This is the habit loop, and it's easy to see why as time goes on it becomes more and more automatic, more and more difficult to break. Of course, our primary goal shouldn't be merely breaking bad habits as much as replacing them with new, healthier habits that help us thrive. The poet Mark Nepo defines sacrifice as giving up with reverence and compassion what no longer works in order to stay close to what is sacred. So, recognizing when habits are no longer working for us and sacrificing them is a cornerstone of wisdom. We might think we're in charge of our thoughts and behavior, captains of our ship, turning the wheel this way and that, but so often it's actually our autopilot that's in control. It reminds me of the time a friend took a family trip on a cruise ship. Her 10-year-old son kept pestering the crew, begging for a chance to drive the massive ocean liner. The captain finally invited the family up to the bridge, whereupon the boy grabbed hold of the wheel and began vigorously turning it. The boy's mother panicked until the captain leaned over and whispered to her not to worry, that the ship was on autopilot. Her son's maneuvers would have no effect. In the same way, if we're not able to reprogram our autopilot, all our protestations of wanting to change will be as pointless as the little boy furiously turning the wheel on the cruise ship. Reprogramming the autopilot takes different amounts of time for each of us. What makes it easier is focusing on keystone habits. When you change one of them, it makes changing other habits easier. Keystone habits start a process that over time transforms everything, Duhigg writes. Keystone habits say that success doesn't depend on getting every single thing right, but instead relies on identifying a few key priorities and fashioning them into powerful levers. For me, the most powerful keystone habit has been sleep. Once I changed the amount of sleep I was getting and started regularly getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, other habits, such as meditation and exercise, became easier. Willpower alone is not enough. As a number of psychological studies have shown, willpower is a resource that gets depleted the more it's used. Dr. Judson Brewer of Yale has summed up the common signs of resource depletion in the acronym HALT, which stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired. It also happens to be a good summation of the standard state of being for so many of us in our current workplace culture, which almost seems designed to create resource depletion. We work through mealtimes, don't see our children, conduct most social contact electronically, and work late. That pretty much touches all 4 bases of HALT. When the habits that lead to resource depletion are the very habits we're incentivized to cultivate, it makes for a tough environment for change. We get a sense of belonging that is important to us, says Cindy Jardine, professor of sociology at the University of Alberta. We can see ourselves as part of a social structure. It's very hard to change a behavior if it is still accepted socially. For instance, stress is bad for us, yet we wear it as a badge of honor. It is seen as a socially desirable thing to be overworking. We don't seem to have the same respect for people who work a 40-hour week. This kind of thinking feeds on itself, creating a downward bad habit spiral. This is all the more reason it's important to create a positive keystone habit. to gain some leverage to take back our lives. And given that we're social creatures, and that social support is one of our primary resources, it's much easier to create and reinforce new positive habits in a social network with a group of friends or colleagues who can band together for mutual encouragement. This is why Alcoholics Anonymous is so successful and has helped an estimated 10 million people to date. But even if the culture of your workplace still operates with the traditional definition of success, you can gather around you a group of like-minded people who want to thrive and not just succeed. At the same time, we can work to change social culture and habits on a large scale. In 1984, 86% of the public did not wear a seatbelt. By 2012, that number was flipped, with 86% of Americans buckling up. This is an example of an upstream intervention. Policies at the top can be changed through laws, tax incentives, and the provision of services that will gradually change habits on a wide scale. Downstream interventions are aimed directly at individuals, and they are most effective when people are going through transitions, such as when moving or starting a new job. But we don't have to wait until we move or change jobs to change our lives. Nor do we have to wait for large-scale, upstream change. We can initiate change right now. There are endless starting points. For me, one of them was reading the Stoics. Stoicism is a school of philosophy founded in Athens in the 3rd century BC. Though Zeno of Citium is often credited with its founding, Stoicism is now more widely known through the work of the 1st century Roman philosopher Seneca and the 2nd century Greek Epictetus. Stoicism teaches that unhappiness, negative emotions, and what we would today call stress are not inflicted on us by external circumstances and events, but are, rather, the result of the judgments we make about what matters and what we value. To the Stoics, the most secure kind of happiness could therefore be found in the only thing that we are in control of, our inner world. Everything outside us can be taken away, so how can we entrust our future happiness and well-being to it? Stoicism is hugely relevant to our time. Stoicism took off because it offered security and peace in a time of warfare and crisis. Write Rob Goodman and Jimmy Soni, authors of a biography of the Stoic Cato the Younger. The Stoic Creed didn't promise material security or a peace in the afterlife, but it did promise an unshakable happiness in this life. Around 2 centuries after Cato the Younger, one of Stoicism's most famous practitioners and philosophers arrived, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who reigned for nearly 20 years as the last of the so-called 5 good emperors until his death in AD 180. Marcus Aurelius was a true paradox, an emperor with almost unlimited power to control his world and circumstances, who nevertheless had a deep understanding that happiness and peace do not lie in the outside world. For Marcus Aurelius, the quality of our day is up to each one of us. We have little power to choose what happens, but we have complete power over how we respond. It all starts with setting the expectations that make it clear that no matter how much hardship we encounter, how much pain and loss, dishonesty, ingratitude, unfairness, and jealousy, we can still choose peace and imperturbability. And from that place of imperturbability, or ataraxia, as the Greeks called it, we can much more effectively bring about change. In the W.C. Fields movie, Never Give a Sucker an Even Break, Fields' niece is about to throw a rock at someone. He tells her to count to 10. As she counts, she gets more and more relaxed. When she reaches 10, he tells her to throw, because now you got a good aim. In his meditations, Marcus Aurelius did not sugarcoat life. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood or birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine, and so none of them can hurt me. Not a bad solution to road rage, or rudeness at the supermarket, or to the many travails of modern office life. So much of the time, what is standing between us and satisfaction is us. This isn't to say we control whether we get that promotion, or how our kids are going to act, or if a relationship is going to work out. Nor is it saying that things like that are not important. It's saying that we can control how much we're controlled by things outside ourselves. So the first goal, as the first-century Stoic philosopher Agrippinus put it, is not to be a hindrance to myself. Or in the classic comic strip, Pogo's famous turn of phrase, "We have met the enemy, and he is us." Stoicism is not just a tool for staving off unhappiness when we don't get a much-desired promotion. It also teaches us to put that promotion and all our success in its proper perspective. Too often, Stoicism is confused with indifference, but it's really about freedom. As Seneca said, once we have driven away all that excites or affrights us, there ensues unbroken tranquility and enduring freedom. Sometimes people let the same problem make them miserable for years, when they could just say, "So what?" That's one of my favorite things to say. Andy Warhol. Some might look at these practices as a luxury, that it's all very well for emperors and the financially independent, for people who have their basic needs met and have what are known as first world problems. What about those without a job who are struggling to put food on the table? In fact, it's in extreme circumstances that Stoicism has the most to offer us. It is in times of great adversity when we are pushed and challenged that these principles become essential. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor whose parents, brother, and pregnant wife all perished in the camps. What he took away from that unimaginable horror became the basis for his timeless book, Man's Search for Meaning. "We who lived in the concentration camps," he wrote, "can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." To Frankl, every day, every hour, offered the opportunity to make a decision which determined whether you would or would not submit to those powers which threaten to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom. And what Frankl did with that freedom was to find meaning in his suffering, and, by extension, all suffering. "If there is a meaning in life at all, then there must be a meaning in suffering," he wrote. "Suffering is an ineradicable part of life, even as fate and death. Without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete." One of the great texts on the relationship of suffering, acceptance, wisdom, and transformation is the Book of Job, which asks how we should respond when circumstances seem to be at their most unfair and capricious. In other words, what do we do when bad things happen to good people? Job, a wealthy farmer, was the subject of a debate between Satan and God. Satan believed that Job was faithful only because he was prosperous. If Job's good fortune was removed, Job would renounce God. And so the two agreed to an experiment of sorts. In short order, Job's livestock was destroyed. His sons and daughter were killed when the house they were in collapsed, and Job broke out in sores all over his body. But Job's reaction was to proclaim, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord praised." In the end, not only did God restore Job's fortunes, he increased them. The message of the parable is that there is a hidden purpose and alchemy in suffering that's transmuted into wisdom and strength. As Francine and David Wheeler, who lost their 6-year-old son Ben in the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, in December 2012, told Oprah, "The mistake is looking at life and thinking, I have nothing. Life has nothing left to give me because of my tragedy. And, in our darkest moments, we have been there. Yes, but the key is, it doesn't really matter what you expect from life, and to be able to see that and accept that is a very important step to finding your way out of the dark. You've got to make your heart bigger than the hole. You just have to make your decisions out of love. And when we make the decisions out of fear, that's when we have problems." Nelson Mandela captured the imagination of the entire world, not because he was a political prisoner for 27 years who then became president, but because of the transcendent wisdom he demonstrated after his release. "As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison." Such equanimity and grace in the face of real suffering are in sharp contrast to the way we often react to the trivial challenges we let it disturb us. The truth is that even in everyday adversity, the principles, though of course not the immediate stakes, remain the same. How we respond to adversity can make a huge difference to our health and to our lives. Psychologist Salvatore Madi and his colleagues at the University of Chicago studied more than 25,000 employees of Illinois Bell Telephone after the company was downsized 50% in 1 year in what was considered the largest upheaval in corporate history. 2/3 of our sample broke down in various ways. Some had heart attacks or suffered depressive and anxiety disorders. Others abused alcohol and drugs, were separated and divorced, or acted out violently. In contrast, 1/3 of our employee sample was resilient. These employees survived and thrived despite the stressful changes. If these individuals stayed, they rose to the top of the heap. If they left, they either started companies of their own or took strategically important employment in other companies. What the researchers found is that those who were able to make the transition a success used, as they put it, the 3C attitudes. First, there was commitment, deciding to join in and try to be a part of the solution. Next was control, fighting to maintain a sense of resolve as opposed to resignation. And last was challenge, finding ways to use the crisis to strengthen themselves, to build resilience and grow. According to Lawrence Gonzalez, author of Deep Survival, Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why, when faced with life-threatening situations, 10% of us will stay calm, focused, and alive. The other 90% of us will panic. What's the difference? Those who are most likely to survive, he says, are those who are able to find opportunity in the situation. For instance, they are more likely to see beauty around them. Survivors are attuned to the wonder of the world, he writes. The appreciation of beauty, the feeling of awe, opens the senses. He cites the experience of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the aviator and author of The Little Prince. After his plane crashed in the desert in Libya, Saint-Exupéry kept calm by finding something to focus positive energy on. Here we are, condemned to death, and still the certainty of dying cannot compare with the pleasure I am feeling. He wrote, "The joy I take from this half an orange, which I am holding in my hand, is one of the greatest joys I have ever known." By finding something, anything, to enable us to keep the pathways of hope open and a positive attitude alive, we can deal with loss, suffering, and tragedy bit by bit. Survivors take great joy from even their smallest successes, writes Gonzalez. Count your blessings, be grateful you're alive. So yes, it's a blessing to be healthy. It's a lucky thing if we live near a park or have access to the great outdoors. But no matter what our situation is, life will inevitably challenge us. What is important is to know that we have the inner tools to meet those challenges. There is a big difference between stoic acceptance and resignation. Cultivating the ability to not be disturbed by our life's obstacles, disappointments, and setbacks doesn't mean not trying to change what we can change. The Serenity Prayer, adapted from the one written by the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr in 1942, sums up Stoic wisdom. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Yod. And the wisdom to know the difference comes from our ability to move from our narrow, self-absorbed world to a world that encompasses a larger perspective and a higher altitude. And it all starts with daily, tiny, positive changes that move us in the direction we want to go. Let me suggest 3 that have made a big difference in my life. 1. Listening to your inner wisdom. Let go of something today that you no longer need. Something that is draining your energy without benefiting you or anyone you love. It could be resentments, negative self-talk, or a project you know you're not really going to complete. 2. Start a gratitude list that you share with 2 or more friends who send theirs to you. 3. Have a specific time at night when you regularly turn off your devices and gently escort them out of your bedroom. Disconnecting from the digital world will help you reconnect to your wisdom, intuition, and creativity. And when you wake up in the morning, don't start your day by looking at your smartphone. Take 1 minute, trust me, you do have 1 minute, to breathe deeply or be grateful, or set your intention for the day. Wonder. Men go forth to wonder at the heights of mountains, the extent of the oceans, and the courses of the stars, and omit to wonder at themselves. St. Augustine. Blast off on a journey to inner space. On the morning after the launch of HuffPost Germany, in October 2013, I was in a car on my way to the airport from the center of Munich. It was raining, which gave everything a beautiful, almost magical shimmer. All the buildings and trees seemed wrapped in wonder. Yet when I arrived at the airport, everyone I talked to was complaining about the rain. We were all experiencing the same weather, but with very different results. Wonder is not just a product of what we see, of how beautiful or mysterious or singular or incomprehensible something may be. It's just as much a product of our state of mind, our being, the perspective from which we are looking at the world. At a different time, in a different city, maybe even most times in most cities, I too might have been annoyed by the rain. But at this particular time, in this particular city, what came to my mind instead was a poem by Albert Hufstekler. I know his name sounds German, but he's from Texas. We forget we're mostly water till the rain falls and every atom in our body starts to go home. Countless things in our daily lives can awaken the almost constant state of wonder we knew as children. But sometimes to see them, we must look through a different set of eyes. The triggers are there. But are we present enough to experience them? When my girls were just a few years old, I remember one of those clear California evenings when the stars seemed close enough to touch. Christina and Isabella were cradled in the crook of each of my arms as we lay on the grass in the backyard, watching the universe go by. While Isabella was stretching out her little hands, trying to peel a star off the rind of heaven, Christina was, as usual, asking questions. "Mommy, what makes it go?" Her question was as old as time itself. When men began to wonder about the hidden causes of things, they were on their way to the discovery of science. Our proud scientific age is rooted in wonder. Men were first led to the study of philosophy, wrote Aristotle, as indeed they are today, by wonder. Physicist James Clerk Maxwell's first memory was lying on the grass, looking at the sun and wondering. That sense of wonder is often stronger when it's provoked by things ordinary and unassuming. Our children's faces, rain, a flower, a seashell. As Walt Whitman said, "After all, the great lesson is that no special natural sights, not Alps, Niagara, Yosemite, or anything else, is more grand or more beautiful than the ordinary sunrise and sunset, earth and sky, the common trees and grass. 10,000 flowers in spring, the moon in autumn, a cool breeze in summer, snow in winter. If your mind isn't clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life." Wu Men. At the root of our secular age is the fatal error that has led us to regard organized religion and the spiritual truth that man embodies as one and the same thing. This has caused millions to deny the reality of the latter because they have rejected the former. The impulse to know ourselves, which, after all, is a key component of spiritual seeking, is as deeply imprinted within us as our instincts for survival, sex, and power. As Goethe wrote, "This life, gentlemen, is too short for our souls. The preoccupations of our daily life can never satisfy our deepest needs." Atheist that I am, philosophy professor Jesse Prinz wrote, "It took some time for me to realize that I am a spiritual person." And a growing number of people who proclaim themselves atheists because they're uncomfortable with organized religion and its depictions of God, especially the image of the bearded figure in the sky, acknowledge experiencing awe and wonder in their lives, experiences that stop them in their tracks, transport them to hidden worlds, and give them a glimpse of the fathomless mystery of life. Einstein defined wonder as a precondition for life. He wrote that whoever lacks the capacity to wonder, whoever remains unmoved, whoever cannot contemplate or know the deep shudder of the soul in enchantment, might just as well be dead, for he has already closed his eyes upon life. Throughout history, great scientists, whom Arthur Koestler described as peeping toms at the keyhole of eternity, have shared this sense of childlike wonder. I completely understand the sense of wonder that has led men and women through the ages to explore outer space, but I've personally always been much more fascinated with exploring inner space. There is, of course, a connection between the two. Astronauts have often reported transformational experiences when they looked back at Earth, a phenomenon that has been called the overview effect. As Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man on the moon, described it, there was a startling recognition that the nature of the universe was not as I had been taught. I not only saw the connectedness, I felt it. I was overwhelmed with the sensation of physically and mentally extending out into the cosmos. I realized that this was a biological response of my brain attempting to reorganize and give meaning to information about the wonderful and awesome processes that I was privileged to view. What can we gain by sailing to the moon if we are not able to cross the abyss that separates us from ourselves? This is the most important of all voyages of discovery, and without it all, the rest are not only useless but disastrous. Thomas Merton, Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, who is intent on colonizing Mars, has also given expression to the other age-old human yearning. I came to the conclusion that we should aspire to increase the scope and scale of human consciousness in order to better understand what questions to ask. Really, the only thing that makes sense is to strive for greater collective enlightenment. But there is no collective enlightenment without personal enlightenment. And spiritual teachers, poets, and songwriters alike have, in so many ways, through so many centuries, told us that unconditional loving is both at the heart of the human mystery and the only bridge from our sacred inner world into the frenetic outer world, or, as Kurt Vonnegut put it in his book, The Sirens of Titan, a purpose of human life, no matter who is controlling it, is to love whoever is around to be loved. And now, we have the empirical data to back up what the songs and sacred texts have told us. As Professor George Vaillant, who oversaw the Harvard grant study, which followed the lives of 268 male Harvard undergraduates beginning in 1938, put it, the 75 years and $20 million expended on the grant study points, at least to me, to a straightforward 5-word conclusion. Happiness is love. Full stop. It is the same conclusion reached without spending 75 years and $20 million by the English poet Ted Hughes. The only thing people regret is that they didn't live boldly enough, that they didn't invest enough heart, didn't love enough. Nothing else really counts at all. Nature and art are two of the most fertile grounds for experiencing wonder. Essayist and philosopher Alain de Botton describes art as an apothecary for the soul. Art, he writes, enjoys such financial and cultural prestige that it's easy to forget the confusion that persists about what it's really for. In describing Claude Monet's The Water Lily Pond, one of the most popular works at the National Gallery in London, he writes that some worry that the fondness for this kind of art is a delusion. Those who love pretty gardens are in danger of forgetting the actual conditions of life: war, disease, political error, immorality. But the real problem in our lives, he argues, is elsewhere. The real risk is that we will fall into depression and despair. The danger is that we will lose hope in the human project. It is this kind of despondency that art is uniquely well-suited to correct. Flowers in spring, blue skies, children running on the beach, these are the visual symbols of hope. Museums and galleries remain among the few oases that can deliver what has become increasingly rare in our world: the opportunity to disconnect from our hyper-connected lives and experience the feeling of wonder. Museums are where we go to commune with the permanent, the ineffable, and the unquantifiable. And it's an especially rare and thus precious experience in our technology-besieged lives. Maxwell Anderson, the CEO of the Indianapolis Museum of Art, describes a museum's mission as providing visitors with resonance and wonder, an intangible sense of elation, a feeling that a weight was lifted. Or, as my fellow countryman Aristotle put it, catharsis. Every era has to reinvent the project of spirituality for itself, wrote Susan Sontag in The Aesthetics of Silence. And museums offer a pathway for that reinvention. Sometimes, of course, reinvention means going back to something that's always been there. What makes it harder today is our obsession with photographing everything before we've even experienced it, taking pictures of pictures or of other people looking at pictures. Sherry Turkle, MIT professor and author of Alone Together, has written about the cost of constantly documenting, i.e., photographing, our lives. These interruptions, she writes, make it hard to settle into serious conversations with ourselves and with other people, because emotionally, we keep ourselves available to be taken away from everything. And by so obsessively documenting our experiences, we never truly have them. Turkle is optimistic, however, that the generation that has been hit the hardest by this will also be the one to rebel against it. She recounts the thoughts of a 14-year-old boy who told her, "Don't people know that sometimes you can just look out the window of a car and see the world go by and it is wonderful? You can think. People don't know that." My younger daughter, Isabella, came to the same realization when, as an art history major, she was given an assignment to spend 2 hours in a museum in front of a painting and write down her experience. She described the assignment as both exhilarating and unsettling. Unsettling because I realized I have never really seen a painting, and exhilarating because I was finally seeing one. She had chosen to look at J.M.W. Turner's The Fighting Temeraire in the National Gallery in London, and she describes the process of looking at the painting for 2 hours as parallel to going on a long run. As odd as it sounds, looking at a painting for 2 hours requires you to push yourself and go past the point of what is comfortable. But what was so interesting was that when I was finished, I had what felt like a runner's high. I felt like I had just experienced something magical, like I had created a tie between the art piece and me. She'd had an experience that cannot be captured on Instagram or Twitter. After she had been looking at The Fighting Temeraire for about an hour, a security guard came up to her and asked what she was doing. I found this hilarious because what I was doing was looking at a painting. But we have gotten to the point where someone standing in front of a painting, just looking at it for a long period of time, is suspect. Fully giving our attention to anything, or anyone, is precisely what is becoming more and more rare in our hyper-connected world, where there are so many stimuli competing for our time and attention, and where multitasking is king. The museum experience provides us with mystery, wonder, surprise, self-forgetfulness, vital emotions most undermined by our always-connected 24/7 digital culture, which makes it a lot easier to shy away from introspection and reflection. Increasingly, the world around us, or at least the one that's presented to us by the tools we choose to surround ourselves with, is designed, and very well at that, to take that element of surprise out of our path. The ever more sophisticated algorithms on the social media sites where we live our lives know what we like, so they just keep shoveling it to us. It's celebrated as personalization, but it often caters to a very shriveled part of who we really are. They know what we like, but they don't know what we don't know we like, or what we need. They don't know our possibilities, let alone how vast they are. In The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains, Nicholas Carr writes that there needs to be time for efficient data collection and time for inefficient contemplation, time to operate the machine and time to sit idly in the garden. There's not a lot of garden left in the world. And this is why museums need to guard against the danger of using social media in a way that reduces the essential art experience to more apps providing more data. Ultimately, this is as laughable as reducing the experience of going to church down to parishioners tweeting, "At church, pastor just mentioned loaves and fishes. Anyone have some sushi Rex for later?" Or whipping out their iPads to quickly look up the fact that the Sermon on the Mount took place near the Sea of Galilee, which, following a link I see, is the lowest freshwater lake in the world. I should totally tweet that. Or even better, I can just imagine the tweet if social media had been around 2,000 years ago. Hey, I might have just tweeted it myself. Just checked in at Gethsemane. Cool garden. Anyone want to meet up? Of course, social media have a role to play in museums as in life. They can provide access to a much wider audience, let potential visitors know what's going on, and extend the museum visit by allowing users to continue the aesthetic experience after leaving the museum and share it with their friends and community. It's when we move social media from the background to the foreground that we undermine the artistic experience. Museums all across the world are making good use of new media technologies. The Los Angeles County Museum of Art has Unframed, a blog that showcases the voices of museum curators and visitors alike. It also launched a first-of-its-kind digital reading room, offering important, out-of-print publications. The Museum of Modern Art in New York, MoMA, started an online course for teachers titled Museum Teaching Strategies for Your Classroom, enrolling more than 17,000 participants. The Indianapolis Museum of Art created artbabble.org, an online community that showcases art-based video content. The Walker Art Center in Minneapolis has a website featuring the Walker Channel, which presents live streams of museum events. The Tate Modern in London offers iPhone apps ranging from the Tate Guide to Modern Art Terms to Pocket Art Gallery. which allows users to curate and share their own virtual galleries. And the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam launched Rijksstudio to allow enthusiasts to engage with over 125,000 works from its collection through sharing images, ordering prints on materials ranging from aluminum to plexiglass, or downloading high-resolution images that can be used on anything, from tattoos to upholstery. The museum even launched a contest encouraging people to remix, reuse, and reinvent the masterpieces, offering awards for the best designs and the opportunity for them to be sold in the museum's store. But when museums forget their DNA and get their heads turned by every new tech hottie that shimmies by, they undercut the point of their existence. Too much of the wrong kind of connection can actually disconnect us from an aesthetic experience. To me, the key question is this: does the technology deepen the experience or does it diminish it? Clearly, it can do both. It's great to take advantage of new media tools to reach new audiences and provide platforms for greater engagement with the arts. But we should not forget that while technology will constantly change, the need to transcend ourselves through great art never will. From a centered state of being, every encounter with an object, however ordinary, can be an opportunity for transcendence. But if we don't give our full attention to a deeper experience at a museum or exhibit, what are the chances that we'll give it to a passing cloud, a tree, or a clay jug? Inside this clay jug, there are canyons and pine mountains, and the maker of canyons and pine mountains. All 7 oceans are inside, and hundreds of millions of stars by Kabir. Of course, the visual arts are only one of art's voices. Music, sculpture, photography, cinema, architecture, literature, drama, poetry, dance, each can ignite the deeper truth and awaken the sense of wonder that slumbers within us. Even the ancient art form of rhetoric can pierce through the crusts of our everyday preoccupations and spark the memory of who we are. When Socrates in Plato's Apology addressed his accusers for the last time, "Now it is time that we were going, I to die and you to live. But which of us has the happier prospect is unknown to anyone but God." Or when John F. Kennedy stood within walking distance of the Berlin Wall and declared, "On behalf of all who treasure freedom, ich bin ein Berliner." Or when Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and cried out, "I have a dream." Something was stirred in our souls that transcends words and time. Music has always been a big part of my life. In my 20s, living in London, I became a classical music reviewer for Cosmopolitan, so I could get free records to review. Yes, vinyl records, I know I'm dating myself. I would play them for hours. Indeed, I wrote my second book listening to Haydn's 106 symphonies. And then I fell in love with a man whose idea of heaven was traipsing around Europe, from music festival to music festival. So having spent countless hours in darkened auditoriums, often with my eyes closed, meditating, I have found myself transported by music no matter what the quality of the performance. I remember at Covent Garden in London, a performance of The Marriage of Figaro under a guest conductor. I was sitting with a group of friends that included a brilliant English conductor when, very early into the performance, we realized that this would be a painful affair, especially for him. When the string section was attentive to the guest conductor's unfamiliar rhythm, the brass was not. Soloists bolted off in their own directions, often taking a good share of the chorus, never, unfortunately, the whole lot with them. It finally ended, and our conductor friend was the first on his feet, applauding loudly and long with what certainly appeared to be genuine appreciation. As he applauded, a regular patron seated behind us leaned forward and hollered, "What a terrible performance!" Over his shoulder, applauding even more enthusiastically, our conductor friend shouted back, "What a great work!" A symphony or an opera is such a metaphor for life. As philosopher Alan Watts put it, no one imagines that a symphony is supposed to improve in quality as it goes along, or that the whole object of playing it is to reach the finale. The point of music is discovered in every moment of playing and listening to it. It is the same, I feel, with the greater part of our lives, and if we are unduly absorbed in improving them, we may forget altogether to live them. And sometimes there are great philosophy lessons in the simplest popular song. I fell in love with the lyrics to the Beatles' classic Let It Be When I was at Cambridge, an ode to acceptance written by Paul McCartney and John Lennon that could have been written by Marcus Aurelius. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me. Speaking words of wisdom, let it be. There is sadness in many popular songs, and there is plenty of darkness in great art, whether Shakespeare's Tempest or Mozart's Magic Flute. But in the end, it is overcome by love. There is chaos and ugliness, but a new order of harmony and beauty evolves out of them. There is evil, but it is cast out by good. And there is plenty of darkness in the drawings of children trapped in the violence and the poverty of the inner city. I remember one such drawing by a child in South Central LA. It was no less dark than any of the others, but through the darkness it was clear that this child had seen something beyond, and by seeing it, had given the rest of us access to that vision. In the same way, a collection of poems and whimsical butterfly drawings by children at the Theresienstadt concentration camp, far from diminishing the horror, makes it starker and more horrible when set against the glimpse of another reality. Along with music and the visual arts, another art form that often offers a direct roadmap to our inner lives is storytelling. Humans are hardwired for narrative. We may be the only creatures who see our own lives as part of a larger narrative. Though we're told by physicists that time doesn't exist as we think it does, we're still very much creatures of time. And time inherently creates a story. Things begin and they end. How they end is the story. Or maybe it's what happens between when they begin and end. That's the story. Jung called the universal language of stories archetypes. He described them as ancient riverbeds along which our psychic current naturally flows. Our conscious minds relate to these archetypes through stories. Far from simply serving as entertainment or diversion, stories are a universal language about the purpose of life itself. And that purpose is self-actualization, integrating the third metric into our lives. Christopher Booker identifies 7 kinds of stories: overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, and rebirth. But though there are 7 plots, in one way or another they're all about the same thing: the personal transformation of the protagonist and his or her journey through challenges, ordeals, and wrong turns to a place of wisdom. As in our own lives, the story's outward form must track the inner journey of the hero. When we disconnect from our inner selves and identify exclusively with our ego, that's when we lose our connection with life's meaning and purpose and are left facing a void that we try to fill with more money, more sex, more power, more fame. And as we see in all modern literature, when the ego separates itself from the self, the end is always frustration and destruction. Whether in Herman Melville's Moby Dick or Stendhal's The Red and the Black. We can use the power of story and our primal need for it to redefine our own narrative. We are all on a journey, a voyage, a quest to slay the monster, free the princess, and return home. But too often the goals we seek, those that the conventional notions of success tell us we should be seeking, take us down dead ends, searching for the meaning of our lives in all the wrong places. Mindfulness helps us become aware of our own story. Hello, silence, my old friend. The silence in our lives is under assault on all fronts. Blaring headline news, squawking car alarms, buzzing and chirping smartphones, wailing sirens, especially if you live in New York as I do, numbing elevator music and screens fitted into every available space. We are wired, plugged in, constantly catered to, and increasingly terrified of silence, unaware of what it has to offer. We drown out the big but simple questions of life with the simplistic sound bites of our 500 channel and nothing on universe.